Well, I mean, you said that these two are very popular teams that you can see at your local very easily. These are teams that we see a lot on broadcast as well, just because these two are very strong teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it'll not only interesting to see how they're piloted against each other, but some of the subtle decisions these make. Even within a broad archetype, there's a lot of decisions left to make. You know, the Incineroar on Joshua's team has Taunt, not something you see that often. There's going to be details all across the board like that really help to differentiate these teams from the completely stereotypical version of it.
Lorcy this season coming off of a very strong finish at the Latin American International Championships. Jimmy Friedle on the other side, we saw him on stream in Knoxville in the last match of day 1 leading into day 2 as we take a deeper dive now into Lorcy's team here. The Raging Bolt, the Landorus Incarnate, the Incineroar, Ogerpon with the Heart Flame Mask, Rillaboom, and the Urshifu Rapid Strike style. So again, this is balance.
Yeah, this is that balanced team. It's the leftovers Raging Bolt, the Taunt on Incineroar. I think it'll be really interesting to see how that plays out. Of course, dropping Flare Blitz to be able to fit that. A team that's pretty well established, and what that means is that also Jimmy's not going to be surprised by this, right? Neither player is going to be thinking through this type of matchup for the first time, and so they will have kind of characterized how they normally approach this matchup, and then we'll have to see who has the better answer for it. Of course, Joshua's going to be fighting with that balanced team up against this Trick Room team from Jimmy, these Blood Moon Ursaluna with the Frigoraph, but a couple of fast options as well. The Choice Specs Fluttermane can put out a ton of damage next to Torkoal to add the Photosynthesis on top of that, and the Urshifu Single Strike, it's interesting, an Assault Vest there, so we've seen sometimes Scarf Urshifus on Trick Room teams or Choice Band Urshifus to try to deal a bunch of damage into. This one a little bit more bulky. Also has the Poison Terastallization. No Fluttermane on the other side to get away from in this matchup, and so not getting as much utility out of that. But it'll be an interesting thing for Joshua to have to weather.
Yeah, and you know, the taunt on that Incineroar is going to be very important to try to prevent Trick Room from being set up over on Jimmy's side of the field. Fun facts for both players here. Jimmy Friedle, day 1 stream regular, hopes to see us tomorrow. Like I said, made it to in the Knoxville Regional Championships. He was in the last round of Swiss in day 1, won his win in and moved on to day 2. Lorcy on the other side, chasing a championship after multiple top cuts. You know, it's a feeling to win a championship after being so close so many times, right? Like finally being able to hit a championship after getting so close. Top cut, great. A championship, even better, as the players now are in team preview, really trying to think this matchup through.
Yeah, trying to think about exactly how they want to approach this game 1. Both of them probably have multiple game plans in mind. Probably also thinking about, do I bring this game plan for game 1? What game plan am I then going to use after that if we have to play a full set? And trying to look one step ahead. What do you think your opponent is going to bring to that match? Both teams have plenty of modes, plenty of leads that are possible, and you don't want to get caught back-footed against one you just didn't expect.
Yeah, and even if Lorcy does whatever possible to stop Trick Room from being set up, Jimmy's team does have a few Pokemon that can operate outside of that Trick Room mode. That Fluttermane still hits extremely hard. Urshifu with the Single Strike will also be able to belt out a lot of damage here as both players have locked in. Ogerpon with the Wellspring Mask over on Jimmy's side of the field with the Fluttermane, as Incineroar and Ogerpon with the Heartflame Mask over on Lorcy's side of the field.
Yeah, so 2 Ogerpons out immediately. No Trick Room visible from Jimmy. This looks a lot more like a balanced team at the moment. It means it's going to be able to play pretty straightforward offense against these 2. That Fluttermane immediately looks like it could pump out a ton of damage, but is also a little bit vulnerable. Doesn't have to worry about a Flare Blitz coming in from the Incineroar on the other side, but of course does not want to take an Ivy Cudgel. Yeah,
and you know, Incineroar will be able to target down the Ogerpon over on Jimmy's side of the field with a fake out to you know, prevent possible Ivy Cudgels from landing into that Incineroar or the Hearthflame Ogerpon. It is intimidated, so it will not be doing as much damage, barring a critical hit. So this Fluttermane does have to watch out for taking some physical attacks from that Hearthflame Ogerpon, as Incineroar on Lorcy's side will switch out, it will be the Rillaboom to take the field here. Still has access to a potential fake out into that Ogerpon slot, but will also be able to deal with this Ogerpon on Jimmy's side of the field a lot better as Grassy Surge takes effect, Grassy Terrain takes the field. And here we go, some terastallization going on here, as it is going to be that Flutter Mane. It will terastallize into that Fairy type. It is carrying that Choice Spec, so it is looking to deal a lot of damage out onto the field right now. Ogerpon not going to care too much about any Fairy type attack because of its resistance, but it does just protect itself here as Flutter Mane uses Dazzling Gleam, will hit into that Rillaboom switch. Still going to do good damage, but that Rillaboom is holding the Assault Vest, so a good boost to that special attack. But you see it almost does over 50%, and Ogerpon on Jimmy's side will follow up with an Ivy Cudgel into that Rillaboom slot.
Yeah, so Jimmy hunting for enough damage to take down Lorcy's Incineroar. Instead finds Rillaboom coming in and lands really good damage on it. Flutter Mane doesn't go after the Ogerpon at all. Both Ogerpon and Flutter Mane mostly targeting what was that Incineroar slot. Would have meant that an Ivy Cudgel was pretty free there to go after the Flutter Mane, but Ogerpon just couldn't take that risk. It could have easily been a Shadow Ball coming in that spot, or a Follow Me and a Water Terastallization to mitigate an Ivy Cudgel. And so Ogerpon stays on the back foot for a turn, but now things are a lot more clear. The Terastallization has been spent on Jimmy's side. The Choice Specs has been locked into. The flexibility and options for Jimmy are a lot less reduced, which makes it possible for Lorcy to just play into those options. And those include, now that the Fairy Terastallization has been on Flutter Mane, that Fake Out is available. You can mitigate damage coming in for a turn in an additional way.
Lorcy will Terastallize the Ogerpon here. Gonna drop that Mold Breaker ability. Will get that Embody aspect to get a boost to its attack. So this Ogerpon is setting up. This Ogerpon is ready to deal some big damage. Like you said, that Ogerpon on Jimmy's side will be taking neutral Ivy Cudgels here. As the Flutter Mane on Jimmy's side will use Dazzling Gleam, gets the KO on that Rillaboom. So no Fake Out from Lorcy's side of the field. Didn't want to try to launch a Fake Out into that Flutter Mane as Ogerpon uses Ivy Cudgel here. Gonna hit hard with that +1 attack into that Ogerpon, and that's a one-hit KO.
Yeah, just so much damage coming out on the other side. I think a little bit of a traded turn. I'm sure in retrospect, Lorcy would have loved to just have Fake Out plus Ivy Cudgel to take complete control of that turn. But on the other hand, Jimmy would have loved to have a Spiky Shield maybe and keep that Ogerpon safe. So both get a little bit of what they want, and KOs are traded. Rillaboom goes down, the Ogerpon goes down on the other side. Flutter Mane continues to stay on the field, healthy, able to just put out a ton of damage, but with one Fake Out gone, another Fake Out comes out onto the field, so that play is still there for Lorcy.
Yep, Torkoal will take the field for Jimmy's side of the field. Lorcy will switch back in the Incineroar, so again, more Fake Out options, but, you know, Torkoal, well, I guess the Sun does a couple things. It activates Flutter Mane's Photosynthesis, boosts its special attack, I believe. And, well, now it also boosts all the fire type attacks over on Incineroar and Ogerpon. Yeah,
Torkoal just coming in and ratcheting the damage on both sides up a notch. Those Ivy Cudgels look enormous, and those Dazzling Gleams start to look like they're a threat even to Incineroar and Ogerpon with the Choice Specs and the Fairy Terastallization on top of the Photosynthesis. I have to imagine the Fake Out, though, means that Flutter Mane just has to leave the field. Can't really take advantage of this position itself. There's not the same trades available if the Fake Out goes into another spot, and so instead it is just Urshifu switching in and taking the Fake Out.
And Ogerpon on Lorcy's side of the field will go for an Ivy Cudgel here. Hits into that Urshifu, which was that Flutter Mane, picks up big damage right there and gets the KO, but Torkoal now gets to make a move here. Will go for an Earth Power into that Ogerpon slot, does good damage, but Ogerpon hangs on with just a sliver of health. Ogerpon and everything touching the field will recover from the grassy terrain, so that Urshifu over on Jimmy's side of the field just really switching in to sacrifice itself in order to allow Flutter Mane to come back in, get that Photosynthesis boost again, so now this Flutter Mane is ready to go.
Yeah, you can see just the sheer damage that was being pressured because of the Sun and the Embody aspect. I mean, that even Urshifu couldn't come out, and the Fake Out meant that pressure was actually there. But now Flutter Mane lands into such a great position, but no, just goes down to Grassy Glide.
Big one-hit KO, Grassy Terrain boosted Grassy Glide into the physically weaker Flutter Mane. One-hit KO there as Incineroar will knock off the Torkoal, knocks off Torkoal's Charcoal. Torkoal now will use Eruption here. It is weakened because it took some damage, but gets KO on Ogerpon, but not much damage being dealt over to the Incineroar, and Jimmy now has to try to figure out what adjustments need to be made going into game 2, because this Torkoal quite frankly, does not have the offensive output to be able to deal with this Incineroar and this Raging Bolt that replaces the Fallen Ogerpon.
No, absolutely not. For a brief moment, it looked like Fluttermane landed out on the field faster than both Pokemon, with Raging Bolt in the back with no Translation to be available, and just be able to pump out so much damage with Dazzling Gleam. But Grassy Glide was enough damage to just take out the Fluttermane and basically into this game immediately. And so we're going to have to move on to Game 2. Jimmy has to be thinking about a different way to approach it. I think the most notable thing about this Game 1 is that Jimmy left all the Trick Room pieces behind. Basically played a balanced game against another balanced team, where you just have the Ogerpon, the Urshifu, and the Fluttermane with Torkoal there to support them. But I think that isn't a matchup that works well in Jimmy's favor. If you're both just going to play somewhat similar balanced teams, but one of your Pokemon is a Torkoal that has very little agency in the game and may work to just boost the Ogerpon on the other side as much as it helps your Fluttermane, and you don't have the fake outs, the pivoting, the things to really fight in that kind of game, it's going to be really difficult to beat a player like Lorcy at his own game of balance in the situation. But I have to wonder if Jimmy's hesitance to bring Trick Room means he just doesn't think it works very well against this team. Has to worry about the Ogerpon Hearthflame pumping out a ton of damage while you try to get Trick Room up.
Yep. You
have to be careful about keeping Furgraf alive, because otherwise Blood Moon does not like to be up against these double Grassy Glides. It means you're going to have to be forced to Terastallize and still take a ton of damage from them, even if you use your Terastallization to get away from it. And so it's a difficult balancing game to both use Furgraf to get a Trick Room and use Furgraf to prevent all the priority that could come out during that Trick Room. But I have to wonder if it's even, like, despite those difficulties, is not better an option than trying to play this kind of balanced game.
One thing to note about Jimmy's team is that there's no Intimidate option for Jimmy to bring, so this Hearthflame Ogerpon over on Lorcy's side is, if it does opt to be the user of Terastallization, automatically getting that one stage of attack boost, just automatically threatening so much offense. I mean, the Grassy Glide picking up the one-hit KO on the Fluttermane, as well as just being able to pump out so much damage. We saw the Ivy Cudgel from that Hearthflame Ogerpon one-hit KO Jimmy's Ogerpon. So, if you don't have any way to deal with that Hearthflame Ogerpon, then that Hearthflame Ogerpon will continue to deal problems.
If that Grassy Glide KO into Fluttermane is a consistent thing and not just a roll that worked right in that situation in Lorcy's favor, it's almost untenable to try to play this game plan that Jimmy went after, because if you look at Ogerpon versus the rest of the team, we saw the Ivy Cudgel just one-hit KO the Ogerpon on the other side. You saw it one-hit KO the Urshifu on the switch-in. These aren't, like, you have no real answer for the Ogerpon if you're playing outside of Trick Room and without priority protection.
Yeah, so Jimmy has to try to find the pieces that are required to break through Lorcy's team here. Again, mitigating this Hearthflame Ogerpon on Lorcy's side, not allowing him to pick up so many KOs, maybe targeting down a lot faster, but Len, as you mentioned, here we go, Trick Room mode. Lorcy leading the same thing with the Hearthflame Ogerpon. The Hearthflame Mask Ogerpon, as well as the Incineroar. Over on Jimmy's side, it looks like it will be the Fluttermane and the Furgraf.
Yeah, I really like seeing the Furgraf come out here. The Grassy Glides were a problem, but also the fake outs were a problem. They applied pressure to that Fluttermane after it Terastallized. I think Furgraf is going to be useful here. It also keeps Lorcy guessing a little bit. You don't know what Pokemon are in the back. You don't know how important a Trick Room is right in this moment. How much do you have to commit to trying to stop a Trick Room? Or is Furgraf really just there to support this Fluttermane, and there's a couple of other relatively fast Pokemon in the back?
Yep, Jimmy will opt to switch out for Rigraff, will replace it with a Torkoal, so Photosynthesis boost for the Fluttermane, as well as some Fire-type attack boost for the Ogerpon and the Incineroar on Lorcy's side. So no Trick Room for this Torkoal, though. Torkoal operating outside of Trick Room does not seem ideal, because Torkoal is not a speed Pokemon. Fluttermane will Terastallize, will become a Fairy type, so again, that Furgraf really just being a bluff to be able to have that Armor Tail ability and make sure that no Fake Out would be landing. Ogerpon on Lorcy's side will go for a Spiky Shield, and looks like Fluttermane will be moving no Fake Out at all, because of course that Armor Tail. But here's a Dazzling Gleam from the Fluttermane. Terastallize, boosted. Choice Specs does so much damage to Incineroar, but Incineroar hangs on and will eat away at its Citrus Berry.
Yeah, Incineroar gets really chunked down by that. You can see the sheer damage. You can see why the Terastallization is also important on that side. That knockoff would have been almost a KO if the Terastallization hadn't come through. Now Fluttermane loses a chunk of health, gets the choice specs knocked off, and doesn't have quite the same damage output, but also then is free to switch moves, is able to chase after that Ogre Pawn with a Shadow Ball and try to put the damage together in a different way. But it looks like mostly Jimmy's going to be going after the same game plan, just with Ferograph there to support as well.
Yep, Incineroar will switch out. Rillaboom will take the field here. Again, that grassy terrain will be nice. It will allow the Ogre Pawn to Grassy Glide to be able to bypass, well, just get the KO right there. So twofold there, setting up the grassy terrain to set up residual healing, but also allow the Grassy Glide to connect and pick up the KO before Flutter Mane can't do anything at all. Here goes Torkoal with an Eruption. Rillaboom does not enjoy seeing that. Sun Boost, one-hit KO, and the KO on the Ogre Pawn as well, so big damage being dealt to both sides.
Yeah, I love that little trade there. Lorcy takes his shots as Ferrograph's not coming in. Grassy Glide's just going to KO this Flutter Mane. But Jimmy goes, well, if you're going to get Rillaboom out on the field to enable Grassy Glide and then go for Grassy Glide into Flutter Mane, well, that's just going to be two Pokemon who have not just damaged Torkoal. It's going to be sitting there at full health, and they're just going to both go down to Eruption. Two enormous KOs from Eruption traded for Flutter Mane. I'm not sure it's clear whose trade that is the advantage of. The Flutter Mane seems so crucial to Jimmy's game plan. Rillaboom may have done some of his job by getting Grassy Terrain down before this Raging Bolt comes in. The Ogre Pawn didn't spin the Terastallization in this game. That means it's still available for the Raging Bolt to go for a Fairy Terastallization if it needs help to deal with the single strike Urshifu. But definitely just an extremely explosive turn. Yeah,
big damage being dealt all across the board. Lorcy down to his final two Pokemon. It is the Raging Bolt hiding in the bag at full health, and the Incineroar that has taken a bunch of damage, as well as eaten away at its Citrus Berry. Urshifu single strike takes the field for Jimmy's side. Now comes the, well, the Raging Bolt. It has to Terastallize. Like, Incineroar is not really a great option for Terastallization here, so Raging Bolt Terastallizing into that Fairy type to be able to withstand any Dark type attacks from that Urshifu, but it does have access to Poison Jab as Ferograph here will take the field, giving protection with that Armor Tail ability, and here it is. Raging Bolt will Terastallize into that Fairy type, just trying to resist any Dark type move. Possible Wicked Blow, a possible Sucker Punch into that slot, but again, Poison Jab can do a lot of damage to this Fairy type Raging Bolt.
Yeah, and whether it does it this turn or not, it's just a close combat coming in this turn because it is Assault Vest. The Urshifu is going to be free to change targeting. It's going to be able to chase this Raging Bolt with Poison Jab on future turns. And of course, that means with close combat landing into Incineroar unable to protect itself, couldn't have been Fake Out with the Ferograph coming in. That was a KO that had to land and put Lorcy down to just one Pokemon.
Yep, and Ferograph does take a Dragon Pulse, will heal back with that Citrus Berry. So Ferograph now at about 3/4 of its health remaining. Urshifu does have a defense drop from the close combat, but again, can now start targeting with the Poison Jab. So you do have to watch out, though, because the close combat defense drops could matter here. But here's a helping hand from that Ferograph. Will boost this Poison Jab from Urshifu, and here's the Poison Jab into that Raging Bolt. Doesn't even do 50% at all, so Raging Bolt hanging on as Raging Bolt goes for another Dragon Pulse into Ferograph, but again, that Grassy Terrain and that Citrus Berry taking it out of range from being KO'd from the second Dragon Pulse.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ends up being a pretty good turn for Jimmy. You have to imagine with that targeting, Lorcy was expecting the Urshifu to just switch off the field, try to get rid of that close combat special defense drop, but he can't allow these turns to go by. Well, that Poison Jab didn't do that much. It made it feel like the game was still in play. That Poison Jab can't be traded for a Dragon Pulse that just does damage to Ferograph without actually getting the KO, because that means another Poison Jab is coming in.
Yep, and Raging Bolt hangs on with barely any health at all, but here's a Dragon Pulse, and Urshifu, thanks to that Assault Vest, does hang on. It does have one stage of decreased special attack, so again, it's kind of interesting to note. This Poison Jab from the Urshifu, boosted by Helping Hand, is going to be a 3-hit KO anyways.
Yeah, it's going to be a 3 KO. You have to also look at that Dragon Pulse damage, which was not enough to pick up the KO on Urshifu. And imagine that was basically the best possible situation for Dragon Pulse damage into that Urshifu. The Sun was still up to give the Photosynthesis boost to the Raging Bolt. The Urshifu had been forced to close combat and lose one stage of special defense, and it still wasn't enough to pick up the KO. That means that Lorcy can't really play for that end game, because even without catching a move on Terastallization, Jimmy can just wait, find out where the Terastallization is, and just eventually win that with Poison Jabs.
Yeah, taking a quick look here at the replay, turn 1 was a pretty explosive start. Choice specs, Terastallized, Photosynthesis boosted, Dazzling Gleam doing so much damage to that Incineroar. Unfortunately, that Flutter Mane has kind of run into issues where it just could not be out on the field at the same time as the Ogerpon because of the threat of how much damage that Grassy Glide does. But that was a great turn because of the trades.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the threat of the Grassy Glide is only there if you don't have to take too many other actions to enable it, right? In that case, it was the Rillaboom having to switch in, which meant completely ignoring the other slot. I think that was actually just a play that doesn't work for Lorcy in almost any situation, because if the Torkoal is staying in, then it's going to click Eruption. Really, really nothing else to click there.
Pretty straightforward, yeah.
Take those 2 KOs. If the Torkoal is not staying in, then it's switching to Farigiraf and blocking your Grassy Glide. It was a play that probably didn't have any real winning outcome for Lorcy, and instead it ends up with like a devastating double KO with Eruption. Flutter Mane does its job. It becomes a focus that allows the Incineroar to be weakened enough that Close Combat was able to pick up the KO later, and then to open the space for Torkoal to get those double KO with Eruption, which meant that left basically Raging Bolt on an island by itself, because with Incineroar weakened and without Protect, it just went down to Close Combat the next turn it was on the field.
Yep, and something for Jimmy to note here is that, Jimmy was able to win without setting up that Trick Room. Like, Farigiraf really was just taking the field in order to provide that Armor Tail, which is super important to prevent the possibilities of, the Rillaboom or the Incineroar fake out.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely critical Jimmy continues to bring it, because the Armor Tail is helpful even if he doesn't go for the Trick Room, and it makes Lorcy at least think about the Trick Room all the time. Because Torkoal, you saw how much damage it was able to do when it got a free turn. There's a lot more free turns coming if Farigiraf gets a free Trick Room.
Jimmy will lead with the same Flutter Mane and Farigiraf. Over on Lorcy's side, it will be the same leads as well. The Hearthflame Mask Ogerpon as well as the Incineroar.
So twice now we've seen this Flutter Mane up against the Ogerpon, and the Flutter Mane just initially go for a Dazzling Gleam to mostly target thing sitting next to Ogerpon, while Ogerpon just protects itself. You have to wonder if Lorcy is ready to instead take the shot this turn and just Ivy Cudgel that slot. If you can just take a resisted Dazzling Gleam into Ogerpon and get rid of that Flutter Mane without having to spend nearly as many resources as you did in Game 1, which Lorcy was able to win anyway, or in Game 2 where there's ended up being too high of a cost to take down Flutter Mane, it's so easy. But of course, this could be the one game where Jimmy shifts it up and just goes for a Shadow Ball for enormous damage into the Ogerpon. You have to imagine that if it is that full damage combo of the Specs and the Photosynthesis, that it would be enough damage to pick up a KO onto Ogerpon.
Time winding down here for the decision of the turn. Looks like somebody is going to Terrasilize. It is going to be the Hearthflame Mask Ogerpon. Gonna get that Embody aspect and get that +1 attack boost. So now this Ogerpon will be threatening some offensive options. Where is it gonna land as Flutter Mane goes for a Power Gem here? Hits into that Ogerpon, gets the one-hit KO.
Yeah, I said Shadow Ball, but Power Gem is even easier to make sure that you lock up the damage, and so Lorcy finally takes the risk. Doesn't Spiky Shield the Ogerpon on the first turn and pays the cost. Loses Ogerpon to a one-hit KO while just taunting this Farigiraf. Really strong first turn for Jimmy.
Yeah, and Farigiraf gets taunted, cannot use Trick Room, but such a big turn right there from Jimmy, being able to eliminate that Hearthflame Mask Ogerpon after it had Terrasilize. Raging Bolt will take the field here for Lorcy, but, the Flutter Mane could be problematic if it can switch out and be able to reset its Choice Specs locked move.
Yeah, you have to imagine that that's what Jimmy is going to be after now. That may be so telegraphed that that's what the opening Lorcy needs to try to claw his way back into this game. Farigiraf taunted, not much of a threat. The Flutter Mane locked into Power Gem. Can still try to just go on the offense against the Incineroar. You have to be a little bit careful that that isn't just Photosynthesis, Choice Specs, Power Gem landing into another super effective target. But this is the turn to try to get maybe a Calm Mind boost, try to reposition, and find a way back into this game playing 3-on-4.
Yeah, so Lorcy now has to find options for that Raging Bolt to be able to set up Calm Minds. Jimmy making sure that that Flutter Mane can come back in and put a lot of pressure down onto that Raging Bolt, switches out that Flutter Mane for the Urshifu, and Lorcy will switch out Incineroar for the Rillaboom. There it is, the grassy terrain that's going to be so crucial to make sure that Raging Bolt has a lot of power to stay, as Jimmy just double switching. It's a revolving door of Pokemon here as Jimmy switches out the Farigiraf, and it will be the Torkoal to take the field with a Photosynthesis boost for this Raging Bolt here. It will get a boost to the special attack, so this Raging Bolt can do some more damage. But hey, you know what's better than more damage? Even more damage.
Yeah.
And more bulk.
A free Calm Mind. I think the bulk is really important. Of course, the bulk's not going to help you against the Urshifu on the other side, but it'll help deal the damage to these other three and withstand their attacks. You can see the really high positional cost that Jimmy paid for that turn one, right? It was an enormous KO, but then forced a double switch. And a switch that, you know, you don't really want Torkoal on the field here. You've just given Photosynthesis over to Raging Bolt. It at least threatens an Eruption into Rillaboom that makes Lorcy have to acknowledge that Pokemon and give its credit, but it could easily be mitigated with a switch back to Incineroar. Raging Bolt resists that. Now at +1 special defense, isn't really too worried about what Torkoal is doing. I do think there's a nice combination where if the Terastallization is forced, it seems like Raging Bolt is going to have to Terra at some point to get away from Wicked Blow and super effective fairy moves. Well, once it's Terastallized, then you're a little bit more worried about fire moves.
Can't Terastallize.
Oh, the body aspect has already been used,
Already been used, yeah. As Torkoal gets knocked out immediately. One hit KO'd by the Raging Bolt as Rillaboom uses Wood Hammer here. Will connect into that Urshifu. Boosted by that grassy terrain, Urshifu will hang on, but yeah, so this Raging Bolt, it's stuck like that. Nice thing about that for Jimmy's side of the field is that, you know, we saw how much damage that Poison Jab did. Not much, and instead now Jimmy can be content to just continue to use Wicked Blow, possibly even go for a Sucker Punch to be able to hit into that Raging Bolt slot. Yeah,
absolutely. I would have to imagine the next goal with the offense, though, is Flutter Mane. Torkoal paid the cost this turn, just went down in one hit, but that just paves the way for Flutter Mane to come back in. And if you're sitting in Lorcy's shoes, you do not want that Flutter Mane to come back in. It's going to deal so much damage. Of course, Priority threatens it, but Frigoraph is still fully healthy in the back, is able to provide Armor Tail support. That would mean Dazzling Gleams would just do a ton of damage. Have to be careful. We saw the Rillaboom, Dazzling Gleam, Choice Specs, Photosynthesis damage in game one, and it would not have picked up the KO on Rillaboom at this health. If Rillaboom just weathers an attack and then lands a Wood Hammer into Flutter Mane, that may be game deciding in Lorcy's favor if he can get rid of that Pokemon. So you have to be a little bit cautious, but it seems like Flutter Mane is just this huge weapon being ready to be spent to deal a ton of damage, and Lorcy can control a little bit where it goes to try to mitigate exactly how much he takes, but no matter what, it's going to be a lot.
Urshifu will switch out. Again, this Frigoraph with the Armor Tail ability is so important. Just does not want to get this Flutter Mane on Jimmy's side of the field get picked off by a Grassy Glide, or at least heavily damaged by a Grassy Glide. I find that maybe a combo of Grassy Glide and a Thunderclap into that Flutter Mane slot could do a lot of work and even be enough to pick up the one-hit KO. Or not the one-hit KO, but the KO at this range, right? So Flutter Mane does have to be careful of that, so that's why that Frigoraph is taking the field. Raging Bolt using Thunderclap, but it fails, so it was targeting into that Urshifu slot as Flutter Mane just going for all-out offense, uses Moonblast here, targets down that Rillaboom, just wants to get off the field and gets the KO from that range. So we saw the Dazzling Gleam not be able to get the KO. Moonblast for sure will.
Yeah, Moonblast is enough to do it, and so that first KO was taken, and taken at very little risk to Flutter by Mane by just prioritizing having enough damage to take the Rillaboom off the field. There wasn't really anything the damage that could come back into Flutter Mane on that turn. You can't Thunderclap because of the Armor Tail. You can't Dragon Pulse because Flutter Mane is a Fairy type and just immune to it. And so Raging Bolt is just kind of sitting there hoping to eventually accomplish something. The best thing it could have done on that turn was Dragon Pulse Frigoraph. Maybe that would have been enough damage to pick up a KO, but that's not really the trade you're looking for. It would have meant Flutter Mane would have just stayed on the field healthy.
Yeah, but one of the nice things about removing Frigoraph from the field would be the access to Fake Out into this Fairy-type Flutter Mane right now. So Jimmy in a really strong position right here to get this Flutter Mane out onto the field with a partner Frigoraph as Incineroar takes the field, and it will be unable to kind of like go for the Fake Out here. So we saw Frigoraph does have access to Helping Hand, so really Frigoraph can just help Flutter Mane try to just get a big one-hit KO on this Incineroar right now.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen so many different tools for this damage to come together. This is now Helping Hand, Fairy Terastallization, Choice Specs, and Photosynthesis, all boosting this Moonblast to just insane levels of damage, enough to pick up the one-hit KO on Incineroar. And again, there is just no real answer into the Flutter Mane that is possible. The best thing that can happen is this Dragon Pulse into Frigoraph, and it's not even enough to pick up the KO onto Frigoraph, which means there's another turn of protection for Flutter Mane, and that is just one turn of protection, way too many, because that next Helping Hand, Choice Specs, Fairy Terastallization, Moonblast is going to be easily more than enough damage to pick up the KO on this Raging Bolt.
Yep, and Raging Bolt only has one option to hit into this Flutter Mane. It is that Thunderclap, so because of that Armor Tail, it looks like Lorcy recognizes the writing on the wall here, preparing to run as Jimmy, after losing Game 1, claws back in Game 2 and takes Game 3. to move on to 6-0 here at the Orlando Pokemon Regional Championships.
I really thought it was a great adjustment in this match from Jimmy. He started game one with a game plan of not playing Trick Room. We're going to just play a balanced game and put a ton of focus on Fluttermane. That was a consistent theme for this match from Jimmy. Game one, turn one was a Fairy Terastallization focus on damage from Fluttermane, but it didn't work out because of the priority on Lorcy's side. The fake out provided pressure. The Grassy Glide just eventually picked up an easy KO onto Fluttermane, and so Jimmy makes the adjustment to bring the Frigoraph to still threaten Trick Room. We saw turn one, game three, he still clicked Trick Room, it got taunted and denied, but to provide the Armor Tail support that just allowed this Fluttermane to go off. And then game three was blown wide open by this turn one play where Power Gem is easily enough damage to pick up the KO on Ogerpon. And Jimmy had laid the groundwork for that KO because game one and game two, Lorcy had played safe, played careful, protected that Ogerpon on turn one, while Jimmy had not even gone after it. But he cashes that in, lands the Power Gem onto Ogerpon on turn one, and it feels like nearly ends the game from that point, because without the Ogerpon and with the Armor Tail to support, it was just so difficult to find the damage onto this Fluttermane.
Yeah, the Armor Tail, truly the sort of MVP of that match, most valuable ability, I guess, MVA, but it was so important just because of the fact that, hey, a lot of times these balance teams really love cycling in these fake outs between Incineroar and the Rillabooms. Fake out U-turn, fake out parting shot in order to allow your Raging Bolt to be able to set up, but that Armor Tail really prevents the Incineroars or the Rillabooms from doing such a thing. You kind of switch these Pokemon in, but even if Frigoraph is not on the field, as long as you show that you have the Frigoraph, that makes it very dangerous for you to even think about clicking that fake out unless you know that Frigoraph is not going to be on the field.
I think it also kind of points out what is normally a hole that's very hard to exploit on these teams, which is the lack of Protect. Neither the Incineroar or the Rillaboom is usually carrying Protect, but it's hard to take advantage of that because they're just using Fake Out to cover the thing that they don't want to hit them and then pivoting right back off the field. But when Armor Tail is preventing those Fake Outs, then suddenly that lack of Protect just looks like a very vulnerable spot. We saw 2 turns in a row, Moonblast just land on the thing next to Raging Bolt and pick up KOs. Meanwhile, Raging Bolt, we talked about this in the pre-show, the Raging Bolt, because of the specific combination of offense, it has priority, Sucker Punch style priority that can only be used against a damaging attack, plus Dragon Pulse is sometimes easy to take advantage of. This time it was the Armor Tail protection next to the Fairy Pokemon, meaning that Raging Bolt couldn't do anything, but it was sitting there on the field. And so that meant its partner Pokemon was just totally vulnerable. No Protect available, no partner to try to help it out, and with just 2 quick KOs kind of easily put an end to Lorcy's hopes in that third game.
Yeah, and again, like, you mentioned it before in game 1, game 2, a lot of times that Fluttermane was really trying to ramp up to do a lot of damage, but then, things happen. And then Fluttermane got knocked out before it could really just be that monster that we saw in game 3, right? The Grassy Glide just immediately knocking it out. In game 2, there was everything was thrown at it.
But even in game 2, you can see both players know the potential that Fluttermane has to deal that much damage in the game. And so Lorcy has to take risks to prevent that, right? And so that is switching Rillaboom into Torkoal. Not something you'd want to do in a lot of situations, but you're looking at that Fluttermane being, this might be my chance to just get rid of it. And I think that if I can just get rid of it, there's a path to winning this game. That's how game 1 went down. But then just paying such a high cost for that because Fluttermane had been this attention-drawing magnet.
And then game 3, just Jimmy being able to pick up that big one-hit KO onto the Ogerpon. That was completely different than anything that we saw in game 1 and game 2 because that Ogerpon, game 1 was the MVP clearly for Lorcy's side of the field. Game 2, less so, but it was still a very threatening Pokemon that if you didn't deal with, then it could lead to a lot of issues. But removing that threat, especially after it had already terrestrialized, was so important to be able to set up that, it prevented Raging Bull from being able to terrestrialize at the end and just stay that dragon type that it doesn't really enjoy being going up against choice specs, photosynthesis boosted Fluttermane. Yeah,
you have to wonder if even if it had been a fairy, it would have been able to take that combination of moves that was coming for it at the end. But because it was really the damage output from Raging Bolt that was the problem. It was never the target. It was actually, I think the game, it was still at full health when that match ended because where it was hurting Lorcy was the fact that it couldn't really provide any damage output. It got the nice big 1-hit KO on Torkoal, but Torkoal's role in that match was always going to be somewhat sacrificial, right? It was playing without Trick Room, it's part of making the threat of Trick Room real, right? That's why the taunt had to come in game 3, turn 1, because if you give up the Trick Room and Torkoal then comes in, that's a huge threat. But I think it was really smart the way Jimmy was able to play that. I think it's an important skill to be able to recognize which of your Pokemon are actually really critical in a match and which one you're willing to take risky trades with. And I think both game 2 and 3, Jimmy just kind of left Torkoal there. Game 2, he left it there and then it got a free eruption off and won the game. Game 3, he left it there, took a Dragon Pulse and went down, but it was never the critical piece to the match. It was free to do that.
Yeah, there were a lot of resources that Lorcy had to spend in order to kind of keep up, if you will, right? That taunt had to go down because if not, then the Farigiraf was actually setting up Trick Room that turn, which would allow Torkoal to actually operate under its preferred speed mode, Trick Room. Yeah,
especially because of the other side of the play that Lorcy locked in, right? Because we have to mention, we never get to see what Ogerpon did, but if it's not going to protect itself, if it's going to Fairy Terastallize, it's probably going on the offense against the Fluttermane spot. And if you just let Trick Room go up while KOing the Fluttermane to give a free entryway to Torkoal, that also looks like a pretty rough start to the game. It's a trade that's not always in your favor. I think one of the levers that Jimmy was really able to push was just the type chart one. Yeah. There was only one natural fairy resist on Lorcy's entire team, which was that Ogerpon. You saw what happened when it just quickly went down in game 3. There have been points in this generation where it would have seemed crazy to only have one fairy resist on your team because Fluttermane is such a big offensive threat. But I think this is almost a reaction to the way Fluttermane has shifted. A lot of the Fluttermanes over the last month or so have been speed booster. They've often been taunt and substitute and playing Icy Wind and playing a little bit more of a control and supportive role rather than just the sheer offense that Fluttermane is capable of. But Jimmy showed us just how much damage Fluttermane can do when that's the focus for it.
He's not just going to show us, but he's going to tell us. We're ready now with Joe Brown and Jimmy in the lounge for an interview. Take it away, Joe.
Thank you very much, Dewey and Len. And we're joined by Jimmy, who is 6-0 on the day here, the Orlando Regional Championships. Congratulations on that victory over Lorcy. How do you feel right now?
I mean, it's obviously easy to say I feel really good, but it's also kind of funny. This is the third regional I've gone to in a row where I've been streamed day 1 with pretty much almost exactly the same team. It's 2-1, so I did lose once, but it's kind of funny that it's like the same team that just kept showing up and kept performing for me, so it's been fun.
Not only are you feeling good, but you're looking good. Look at this fit going on here. Give us a rundown. What's going on?
Well, bucket hat from Worlds from Japan. Got to run with it. Just a nice Hawaiian shirt and just, some kind of, they're not really jorts, but they kind of look like them. I came down from Wisconsin, and we just had a bunch of snow last week, so I'm just trying to get in my tropical vibe, really feel like I'm in Orlando.
What's the temperature in Wisconsin right now?
It's warmed up a little bit. I think it's been hitting 60s, but I mean, last week was crazy.
Yeah, that's a snow in April. That's a Wisconsin thing, definitely. But let's get into this round 6 matchup against Joshua Lorcy, and something that Dewey and Evan really noticed at the beginning of that match, especially in game 1, is that Lorcy is a great balanced player, right? He uses well-rounded Pokemon that he can position in and out. And your team definitely has more specific modes, like Trick Room mode, Torkoal mode, different things. So how do you handle a player who is so used to using well-rounded conventional teams of 6?
Yeah, I think you have to play a little differently, especially playing against players, like you said, who've played a lot of balance, especially who've played a long time. They will play a lot slower than other players. So it's kind of just, you got to take your time and kind of take what they give you. And so I think a big thing there was just kind of positioning myself to overwhelm them with all of the damage I have on my team, and just making sure, mostly I had an answer for that Raging Bolt in the back. The Calm Mind, leftovers Raging Bolts, if you let it kind of get going, it's unstoppable, right? So just keeping that in mind as I'm choosing my leads, as once it hits the field, is making sure that it doesn't just get carried away, take over the game, was probably the most important things.
And I noticed there was one moment in game 2, I believe, where the Torkoal got the full sweep. You got your board set up in the position that you want, and Torkoal claimed 2 one-hit KOs at once. Does that feeling ever get old, or is it always cool when it happens?
No, it's always great when it happens. Just picking up 2 full HP Pokemon, 1 hit, it's one of the best feelings ever.
Yeah, so how your team's constructed, obviously it's working well. You're 6-0 at this point. Is it always a position of, can I get Torkoal on the field under Trick Room or under, a position of success? Or have you had to rely in maybe some of your other matches on some other strategies that were not about like Torkoal or Friedle?
It's been mostly a well-rounded team. Torkoal comes out a lot, but also the Flutter main has been doing a lot of damage. So it's got the booster, special attack, and then you get this, the Terra, the Specs, the Helping Hands. It just starts destroying teams if it's faster in it. But also had the Blood Moon Ursaluna, pick up the weight. When Torkoal didn't have a good matchup, but Trick Room was still good, it came out and kind of just swept through that team. So it's a team effort. Every Pokemon puts in work. But definitely some of them have some defined roles. In some games, I'm just never going to bring them. In some games, they're the best thing ever.
And I always wonder, when you have a team composition, revolving around Trick Room, and then you have fast Pokemon like Fluttermane, or usually you'll see on Trick Room teams, often you can see a choice scarf for Shifu, right? For once you're out of Trick Room, and you want to be moving fast. Like your Fluttermane's kind of filling that same role. So how do you play, for anyone watching at home that might struggle, if I'm Trick Room, I should have 6 slow Pokemon, right? No, you want to have some fast Pokemon for when Trick Room expires, right? So how do you handle your speed tiers like that?
I think the big thing is, first of all, making sure you have one really, really, really slow Pokemon. You never want to have a Trick Room team, but then outget Trick Rooms by another Trick Room team. And so Torkoal really helps there. Other than that, I think kind of getting a couple just solid Pokemon in the middle speed tiers, not necessarily the slowest, but not really going to be the fastest, just because they work and kind of that dual mode, inside Trick Room, outside Trick Room. And I think usually having at least one just really, really fast Pokemon. In past formats, I used Tapu Koko a lot for it because it was just fast, good. It's always going to do something. So I think just having that balance just gives you a lot more room to play around and use different Pokemon different times, play against different teams, and you're not just forced in that single Trick Room mode. Oh no, I didn't get Trick Room up. What do I do now? Probably just lose. You've got options to kind of play around. You don't have to set up Trick Room turn 1, So it's kind of just giving yourself options is the way I like to think about it.
Now I'm curious, as you are a Torkoal gamer, but that's a specific type of gamer, right? We have a Koraidon plush over at the edge of the set. Are you counting down the days till Koraidon and Groudon become legal and you have faster Sunsetters to go with your, Roaring Moon and Fluttermane and some of these other past Paradox Pokemon? Or are you still going to stick with the slow Torkoal?
I have no idea. I think Torkoal still seems interesting just because there's a lot of Calyrex ice out there and it's slower. And if, they keep that fire resistance, I feel like that Eruption's still gonna, knock it out like it does everything else. But I haven't really played much of the new regulation yet, so I'm kind of reserved in what's good, what's not good. But I'm definitely interested to see how things shake up. It's always super fun when the restricted legends come out and kind of just get to play around more with these more designed team comps is the way I like to think about them. You got 1 or 2 things and you just really bit out from there, not as much balance or something like that.
And then one last one for you before we get into the fun action here. Do you have any shout outs for any friends or family that are watching at home?
Yeah, shout out to Colin and Casey. They also were staying together for this when we hit up Disney World yesterday. So that was super fun. My friend Micah, he's always helping me get Pokemon and whatnot. Also just, family, friends, everyone watching.